Florida contains three major environmental systems: freshwater, uplands, and coastal. Today we are going to look at the upland system and provide examples from recent outings to upland habitats conducted by the Northeast Florida chapter of the Sierra Club. Now you're probably thinking, uplands? Florida? Well, you're understandably perplexed by that term. The highest point in Florida is only 345 feet above sea level in Florida's Panhandle. By uplands, we mean any Florida ecosystem that is not a coastal or freshwater dominated system such as riverine, swamp, or marsh. Yet the fact remains that in Florida, small changes in elevation can produce dramatic changes in vegetation and the animal life supported by it. Elevation and hydrology are interrelated as low-lying areas collect water. The amount of time soil is underwater is known as the hydroperiod. The areas we will consider as uplands have a hydroperiod of less than 3 months per year. Another important characteristic of uplands is fire. Fire is a natural process started by lightning that helps to form the uplands environment by favoring fire-resistant vegetation. Drier areas at higher elevations are more likely to be ignited and to sustain fire. So fire, elevation, and hydrology are linked and have an important effect on uplands. These three physical factors, along with geology, soil, and climate, all influence the type of vegetation that can flourish. And the plant life will determine what type of animals can live there. Living organisms exist in a complex food web where there are distinct roles. Plants are producers, deriving their nourishment directly from the soil, air, sunlight, or other organic material. Primary consumers live off these plants exclusively by eating their leaves, roots, flowers, or fruit. Secondary consumers prey on other animals, exclusively or in addition to plant sources. Apex predators are at the top of the food chain. They prey on other species, but they are not prey for any other animals within the habitat. In Florida uplands communities, Florida panthers and black bears are considered apex predators. Removing an apex predator can cause the entire community to collapse, since their prey will then multiply and consume food resources within the system beyond its carrying capacity. At the other end of the food web are the decomposers, species that consume dead animals and plants and turn them back into basic compounds like nitrogen that begin the cycle all over again by nourishing the plants, the primary producers. A relationship between living things is not only eat or be eaten. Besides predator-prey roles, animals and plants can exist in symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis takes a few forms. Parasitic, one side benefits and the other suffers, such as a tick and a deer. Commensalism, where one side benefits and the other is unaffected. For example, a Florida scrub jay builds a nest in a scrub oak. Neutralism. Neither side is affected. A goldfinch eats seeds and a flycatcher eats insects in the same area. Competition. Both sides suffer. Gray squirrels and blue jays compete for acorns. And mutualism, where both benefit. A bee collects pollen and pollinates flowers by traveling from one flower to another. Keystone species is a related term that applies to a species that other species depend on. For example, a gopher tortoise digs a burrow in the sandy soil of a scrub or a sandhill, and the burrow ends up being the home of up to 350 other species. Without the tortoise, all of these species would be threatened. All of these relationships demonstrate how critical species diversity is and how important it is to slow the current rate of species extinction, which has accelerated at an alarming pace in recent years. Another important characteristic of species is the concept of home range. This is the amount of space that an animal needs to hunt, socialize, and breed. For our apex predators, this area can be quite large. For a Florida panther, its home range is 200 square miles. For a Florida black bear, it's 110 square miles. A home range is not just total area, it's contiguous area. The home range can be disrupted by human development. Roads, parking lots, buildings can all break up a habitat so that the animal cannot travel through its home range without encountering obstacles such as walls, hazards such as high-speed road traffic, or expanses without needed food or water. This breaking up of larger areas of habitat is known as fragmentation. It can look like there is a lot of natural habitat in an area, such as a suburban housing development with its manicured greenery, but in fact it can be a cause of fragmentation of the habitat the wildlife needs to thrive. Conservation projects are underway in Florida to restore and preserve contiguous wildlife areas, known as wildlife corridors. Two in our area are the Florida Greenway, which runs across the state south of Palatka, and the Ocala to Osceola corridor, known as O2O, running from the Ocala National Forest to the Osceola National Forest. Since plants are the primary producers, we know a lot about the life in an area by what type of plants grow there. The plants and the animal life they support constitute the plant community. And plant communities can be characterized by the presence of certain dominant species. 4 main plant communities are found in Florida's uplands: pinelands, hardwood forests, scrub, and prairies. Pinelands are the most extensive plant communities in Florida. As its name implies, pinelands are dominated by pine trees. Pines are conifers, a type of gymnosperm, the oldest form of seed-bearing plant. A gymnosperm's seeds are covered with a hard coating that allows them to remain viable for long periods and to disperse over the large ranges. Conifers produce these durable seeds in cone-shaped aggregations. All pine trees produce their seeds as pine cones. There are 6 different major species of pine in Florida: longleaf, slash, sand pond, shortleaf, spruce, and loblolly. There are 4 major types of pinelands in Florida, 3 of which are found in our area of North and Central Florida: pine flatwoods, high pine, and scrubby flatwoods. Flatwoods are pine communities existing at lower, wetter elevations. A healthy flatwood has a high open canopy of only pine trees, typically longleaf and slash pines. The understory is low brush such as gallberry, wax myrtle, and saw palmetto. The floor of the forest is wiregrass and a variety of low herbs and grasses. Flatwoods evolved with frequent fires at a rate of every 1 to 5 years. Seasonal flooding and drought may constitute its hydrology. Flatwoods with a hydro period of 3 to 6 months are known as hydric, 1 to 3 months as mesic, and those with little flooding are called xeric. Fire is necessary to keep out hardwood trees and gives these communities their open nature. If fire is prevented from burning or does not occur for any reason, hardwoods, such as turkey oak, will begin to invade the area and change the habitat from pine to hardwood dominated. Florida's forest managers have now adopted a program and techniques of controlled burns to simulate natural fire cycles and maintain the health of the native pine flatwoods. Flatwoods cover about 50% of the land area of Florida. High pine habitats occur on well-drained soils in central and north Florida along Florida's ancient ridges. Like flatwoods, high pine are open forests with tall pines widely separated and a low, sparse understory consisting mostly of perennial grasses. The soil is of two types, sand and clay, so these subtypes are referred to as sandhills and clayhills. These high pine forests are truly majestic, allowing one to see through the tall, slender trunks for long distances, quiet and serene, with a soft floor of pine needles and grasses. These forests were historically longleaf pine, and once covered nearly 70 million acres and could be traveled with ease due to their open structure. They stretched as far north as Virginia, as far west as Texas, and throughout a fifth of Florida. They are 97% gone today, having been converted to agriculture, tree farms, and urban and suburban areas. Conservation of remaining longleaf pine habitat is critical to wildlife such as the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker and Sherman's fox squirrel, which is a species of special concern in Florida. The dominant pine in these habitats was traditionally longleaf pine, but it has gradually been lost to slash pine due to silviculture by the timber industry. On public lands incorporating the high pine and pine flatwoods, a concerted effort is underway to preserve and restore longleaf pine forests. Longleaf pine is uniquely adapted to fire, which is why these habitats are so successful. Longleaf pines produce huge pine cones which germinate within 1 week of reaching open soil, thus making them less vulnerable to fire. The saplings spend 3 to 7 years in the grass stage, where they look like a clump of grass. They grow slowly, they're fire-resistant, and develop an extensive root system impervious to fire underground. Once the grass stage has completed, the adolescent saplings shoot up rapidly, striving to attain a height over 15 feet where they will be out of reach of brush fires. When mature, the longleaf pine's long needles actually release water when on fire to protect its inner bud. Scrubby flatwoods are a transitional zone between the low-lying pine flatwoods and the high pine communities. Transitional zones are common between many different habitats. One doesn't just stop and the other immediately begin, but the change is gradual and typically incorporates a slowly changing mix of the components of the two adjacent ecosystems. These transitional zones are called ecotones, and in the case of flatwoods is so prevalent that it is classified as its own habitat. In the case of scrubby flatwoods, smaller hardwoods such as scrub oak, sandlife oak, and Chapman oak grow in the understory of the slash and longleaf pine. The reason that the hardwoods intrude is that the fire periodicity of these areas is longer than that of flatwoods or high pine, from 8 to 30 years between fires. Fire is suppressed due to a combination of elevation, slope, soil, and drainage. Understory plants in pinelands include low bushes like gallberry, high bush blueberry, featherbush, and saw palmetto. Gallberry is quite common in North Florida, with its glossy ovate leaves, small white flowers, and a small round red and black berry. It is fire tolerant in its ability to resprout quickly from its roots. Saw palmetto is well known to many Floridians by its low, spreading palm-like leaves. The trunk of the saw palmetto actually grows underground, and because of this is able to survive fires. Its fruits are black drupes that are now prized as a treatment for enlarged prostate condition, and because of this has been the target of poaching in recent years in state and federal protected lands. The flora of a pineland's habitat is characterized by native grasses, in particular wiregrass, which is very fire tolerant. It flowers profusely after growing season fires, thereby flourishing in wildfires that destroy other vegetation, making for a floor that is dominated by these grasses and devoid of shrubs and small trees. The forest floor also is home to a wide variety of beautiful wildflowers. One such flower is Bartram's ixia, a purple monocot named for the famed naturalist William Bartram. Bartram's ixia is endemic, which means that it only grows in our area and is found nowhere else. There are many endemic plants throughout our uplands habitats. Animals supported by these habitats include invertebrates like nematodes, centipedes, millipedes, wolf spiders, trapdoor spiders, orb weave spiders, ticks, and eastern yellowjacket. Herpetofauna, such as flatwood salamander, striped newt, oak toad, barking tree frog, chorus frogs, gopher frog, mole skink, six-lined race runner, Florida pine snake, scarlet king snake, eastern diamondback rattlesnake, and gopher tortoise. And birds such as American bald eagle, red-shouldered hawk, tufted titmouse, Carolina chickadee, white-eyed vireo, red-bellied woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, red-cockaded woodpeckers, and pileated woodpecker. And mammals like southern flying squirrel, bats, moles, golden mouse, Florida mouse, southeastern pocket gopher, Sherman's fox squirrel, white-tailed deer, possums, raccoons, red fox, red wolf, coyote, bobcats, black bear, feral pigs, and Florida panther. Many Sierra Club hikes are conducted in pinelands. Ocala National Forest has many absolutely gorgeous stretches of sandhill high pine. Around Juniper Springs, between Clearwater Lake and Alexander Springs. Also Salt Springs to the 88 store, and between Lake Delancey and Rodman Dam. Closer to home, Sierra Club has conducted many outings at Julington-Durbin Preserve in St. Johns County, and which has large areas of sandhill with longleaf pine. Sierra Club has conducted outings through pine flatwoods at Cary State Forest, Bayard Conservation Area, Brannan Field Wildlife and Environmental Area, and Osceola National Forest. Scrubby flatwoods are evident at Sierra Club outings at Moses Creek State Park, Mike Ross Gold Head Branch State Park, and Camp Blanding, as well as the other locations for pinelands already mentioned. The second major classification of uplands is the hardwood forest. There are 3 types of hardwood forest in Florida. The southern hardwood forest is composed of trees common in the southern U.S., characteristic of the Appalachian Mountains. The true southern hardwood forest exists in Florida only along the northern border of the Panhandle. A second type of hardwood forest is the tropical hardwood forest. That's found only in southern Florida. Hardwood forests in most of the state between these two regions are characterized as mixed hardwood forest, of which the dominant species are evergreen trees, such as live oak and cabbage palm, also known as sable palmetto. These species are supplemented by deciduous hardwoods such as hickory, magnolia, maple, and holly. To the north, there is a mixing between species of the southern hardwood forest, and to the south, there is a mixing with species of the tropical hardwood forest. These mixed hardwood forests exist in Florida as islands within other uplands habitats. These islands are known as hammocks. Hammocks exist at a slightly higher elevation than the surrounding environment. Hammock size and distribution is influenced by disturbances in the surrounding habitats, such as fire and flooding. Fire is rare and damaging to hammocks. Because hammocks are dominated by denser growth of shade trees, and exist at higher elevations above the flood levels, these habitats have historically been selected by humans as the best places to live. Consequently, development is a major threat to these habitats today. Hardwood forests are home also to mushrooms. A mushroom is the fruiting body of a fungus. Fungi obtain nutrients from dead or dying organic matter, unlike plants which can obtain their energy from minerals in the ground, sunlight, and carbon dioxide from the air. Some mushrooms are very poisonous, some are edible. It takes a lot of knowledge to tell the poisonous from the edible, so do not eat mushrooms in the wild unless you know what you're doing. Another common feature of the hardwood forest is lichen. Lichen is an organism composed of fungus and algae. The algae combines with the cyanobacteria and produces sugars using the photosynthesis process like a plant. By combining with algae in a symbiotic relationship, a fungus no longer needs contact with dead organic material. The algae benefits by the structure of the fungus. There are 3 categories of lichen: foliose, which are leaf-like; crustose, which are like a flat layer on a substrate; and fruticose, which are freestanding branching tubes. Lichen are often confused with moss, but they are not moss. Common lichen you will see in our forests are deer moss, which is, again, not a moss, and Christmas lichen, which is a distinct red and green crustose lichen growing on the sides of the trees. Lichen is a proven indicator of air pollution. The more lichen, the cleaner and less polluted the air. One more feature prevalent in hardwood forests is the growth of epiphytes, or air plants. Epiphytes are plants that do not need soil to derive their nutrients. They exist by attaching themselves to a host tree, but they are not parasites. They do not harm the host they grow upon. A common epiphyte in oak hammocks is Spanish moss. Spanish moss is not a moss, but is a plant that flowers and propagates by seed. Many of the animal species mentioned in the Pinelands list are found in the mixed hardwood forests as well. Of particular note are the barred owls, which you may hear if you hike in the evening or camp overnight when these raptors are active. Their distinctive call, "Who cooks for you?" echoes throughout these hammocks at nightfall and just before dawn. Eastern towhees are also found in hardwoods as well as most woodland areas. Their song, "Drink your tea," and the call, "Towhee," are also familiar in these habitats. We find mixed hardwood forests throughout northeastern and central Florida, and the Sierra Club conducts many outings where one can experience these environments. Among these are Little Big Econ State Park near Orlando, where the trail winds through both oak and palm hammocks, the hike from Juniper Springs to Salt Springs in Ocala National Forest, and the hike in the Kissimmee River area. At Hopkins Prairie, on the hike from Juniper Springs to Salt Springs, there is a bat house where you can witness the emergence of hundreds of evening bats as they hunt the adjacent prairies and oak hammocks. The oak hammocks dotting the dry and wet prairies of the Kissimmee River area are great places to encounter barred owls and red-shouldered hawks as they use the tall trees to survey the prairie for prey. The oak hammocks of Kissimmee are also heavily populated with feral pigs. Evidence of their rooting is everywhere in the hammock, to the point that in some places it's difficult to find a level spot to camp because the ground has been so dug up. The third type of upland is scrub. Scrub is Florida's oldest and most endangered ecosystem. Scrub occurs in coastal areas, but also in uplands areas in Florida along an ancient ridge that runs along the length of the peninsula. 325,000 years ago, this ridge was a series of islands in a sea that covered most of what is now Florida due to the higher sea level in a warmer time period. Because of the isolation created by the water, many of the plants found in these scrub habitats evolved specifically for survival there and are found nowhere else. In fact, over 40% of the plant species in the scrub are endemic, and there are endemic animal species as well, including the Florida scrub jay and others. Scrubs are fire-dominated, with the fire cycle varying depending on the scrub and determining the type of scrub it is. There are three main types of upland scrubs: pine, oak, and rosemary. All have different fire periods. No matter what type of dominant plant, all are characterized by a very low height. Pines in the pine scrub are called sand pines and are much smaller than other pines. Oak scrubs have 4 different characteristic oak species: myrtle, inopina, sand live oak, and Chapman's oak. All of these species again are low growing, typically around 10 or 15 feet max. Rosemary scrubs are dominated by an endemic plant, Florida rosemary, which somewhat resembles the plant that produces the rosemary spice, but it is not related and has no culinary value. All of the plants in the scrub have adapted to very poor, low-nutrient, sandy soils, dry climate, and fire. One of the adaptations by plants to compete for scarce resources in the scrub is allelopathy, which is a toxic chemical defense whereby one plant suppresses the growth of another plant species. Rosemary employs allelopathy, which is one reason you find ample space between plants with only sand and no other plants growing. When you are hiking through the scrub in Florida, you know it. There is very little shade, and the sandy floor provides little relief from the heat. Oak scrubs have fire every 5 to 25 years, pine scrubs 15 to 100 years, and rosemary scrubs 25 to 100 years. Understory plants common in the scrub are Lyonia and scrub palmetto. We discussed saw palmetto in the context of the pinelands, but there is a variant called scrub palmetto with deep underground roots that is particularly fire resistant and tolerant of xeric soils. Lyonia comes in 2 varieties: feather bush with green leaves and rusty Lyonia with yellowish rusty colored leaves. Wildlife found in the scrubs include deer, raccoons, fox, scrub jays, lizards, and beetles. And of course, our old friend, the gopher tortoise. Sierra Club conducts outings to many areas with scrub habitats. Ocala National Forest in the Juniper Prairie Wilderness between Juniper Springs and Hopkins Prairie, and a stretch of the hike from Salt Springs to the 88 store. The wilderness has examples of both pine and oak scrub, and the midpoint between Salt Springs and the 88 store is an oak scrub. A good example of pine scrub is the hike between Clearwater Lake Recreation Area and the Seminole State Forest. And there is one area that has a wide rosemary scrub. The Chuluota Wilderness just south of Little Big Econ State Park has good examples of rosemary, pine, and oak scrub. Closer to home, the Moses Creek Conservation Area has a huge expanse of oak scrub with some sand pine interspersed. The 4th and final uplands area in Florida is the dry prairie. The dry prairie habitat of Florida is characterized by grasses with some saw palmetto and low shrubs. Prevalent grasses are wiregrass, lovegrass, and bluestem, but many other are present as well. Dry prairies have 100 to 200 plant species per acre, making them one of the most diverse plant communities in North America. Frequent fire is critical for maintaining dry prairie, from 1 to 4 years in interval. Dry prairies are distinguished from wet prairies by the period of standing water in the prairie, dry prairies being less than 3 months, and wet prairies 5 months or more. The largest area of dry prairie in Florida is around the Kissimmee River, south of Orlando, and the Sierra Club has conducted an outing there, a 3-day backpacking trip through the Kissimmee Prairie Preserve State Park. Dry prairie supports several isolated bird populations, including the threatened Florida sandhill crane and endangered Florida grasshopper sparrow. Also present are the crested caracara and burrowing owl. In the park, there are no signposts in order to prevent raptors from preying on the sparrows. In the oak hammocks bordering the prairie, many hawks and owls gather to get a bird's eye view of the small birds across the expansive prairie. The dry prairie is intersected by several low channels for water, known as sloughs, that fill up during the wet season and in some cases are present year-round. These make for wet hiking, as the only way to cross is to wade through the knee-high water, since there are no bridges or boardwalks in the park. All upland areas have been threatened and reduced in size by human activities, mostly agricultural purposes. Scrub is easily cleared, and its sandy soils and higher elevations make for an ideal environment for orange groves. So it is estimated that only 10 to 15% of the historical scrubland still exists as scrub. Prairies make for excellent grazing area for cattle, and of the original 2.8 million acres, 88% has been converted to other uses, primarily ranch land, known as rangeland. The 98% loss of the traditional range of longleaf pine forests has already been mentioned. It is so important for the health of our environment that we preserve what remains of these beautiful uplands habitats. Vote and advocate to conserve our current wild undeveloped uplands areas. Full annual funding of the Florida Forever constitutional amendment is one important example. Supporting local nonprofit conservation organizations like North Florida Land Trust is another effort that is very helpful. It is so much easier and less costly to conserve than to restore. By protecting our natural systems, we will maintain the unique natural environment that makes Florida such an enjoyable place to live and visit. I hope you have enjoyed our virtual exploration of Florida's Uplands Systems, and that we will see you in the future on a Northeast Florida Sierra Club outing to one of these beautiful habitats.